All right, so this next section is not a presentation by SBS. It's really an open discussion. So one of the things that we've been a lot lately is because we've had a lot of our tier ones go live this year. So the contractors to support them, AEC firms, is, well, we've always been buying their hardware. We've always been buying their software. They have to, VPN in. Is there other ways to do it?
All right, gang. So this is an open discussion. We got the sleeves rolled up. It's 3:00, so we can talk a little bit, do some work. We put together a couple slides just to lead us through this and show you some common ways that utilities, external design firms are interacting. But it's very much a conversation. We don't know that these are the only ways. These are the ways we're seeing. So ask questions. We'll do some audience participation and ask who is doing this, and we'll see where it goes. So obviously, everyone interacts with external contractors. There's just too much work to be done. We cannot keep up with just internal groups. Some of the challenges that are inherent in doing that, and feel free to add more if we are missing any. We've heard complying with security requirements can be a challenge. Cost of hardware. Some companies require external contractors to have hardware that they provide. Others don't. Managing contractors. So you have to have logins. You have to almost treat them like an employee, but an external remote employee. Managing SBS licenses. Is it owned on this side? Is it owned on that side? Who has the license? Who's assigned to the license? Process bottlenecks. Whenever you're trying to work and share data, what's the easiest way to move that data back and forth? Any other ones that come to mind as people start thinking about interacting with your contractors that pop out? These are some of the most common ones we've heard and seen. We think we've captured a chunk of them, but okay, we'll continue on from there. Today we're going to show a couple common paths that we see for people that are doing these things, that are sharing data back and forth, and I've already had several conversations with folks on this, so I think we're providing a timely topic on this one. I tried to break it down, Sergey and I tried to break it down between who's holding the SBS licenses and who's hosting the environment, because that seems to be two of the main factors that impact you guys. So obviously one of the paths is that the provider, and by provider I'm talking any external contracting firm. Several partners are here that work with you guys, those kinds of folks. There's a provider-owned license and a provider-hosted environment, meaning that the provider themselves has SBS licenses and the provider uses their hardware and their laptop and just works completely separate. There is a utility-hosted license and a utility-hosted environment. So the utilities they hold all the SBS licenses and they host an environment like some sort of VDI, Citrix kind of login. And then there's a blend of the two where the provider might own the SBS licenses, but the utility still hosts the environment. So these are kind of three variations that we've been seeing throughout the years.
Jim, before we move on, maybe we'll ask this question. So who would, do we have any utility supporting configuration number one? Basically, if I reflect, we have external contractor taking a configuration template from utility and running it kind of on their own environment and just exchanging DWG results. So do we have any utilities who consider to be kind of current supported approach for work with contractors?
This is where you're almost handing off a design file. Like you as a utility may say, here's the file I want you to work on. They take it local, work on it, and hand it back through some sort of file exchange. Anybody in here using that with their contractors? Okay. It's one we've seen before. There's a couple different uses for it that we can talk through specific workflows.
I'll take that question up one level. Is there anyone here who is not requiring their contractor to deliver an AUD format.
There's a half solution. So when you ask your contractors to provide a design back to you, they don't necessarily have to provide it in AUD format.
It's kind of stipulated when we contract it out, because EPC, we do completely because they're engineering it and they're building it, they can do it however they want in their design tool, because they're constructing it. For sure. We have a pretty complex version where we have all of our costing and all of this stuff intertwined. So any costing job needs to be done inside of AUD. But we're having a lot of issues because we provide them our hardware, software, all of that kind of stuff. Right. And we're just running into big delays in getting work out. And then there's the whole training component updates, all that kind of stuff. So, we're kind of on the brink of doing both right now, and hoping to, you're kind of stealing my thunder for tomorrow, but we're hoping to get some suggestions to bolster up the Let's Go AUD with our contractors. And this is how we can do it easier and better.
For sure. The EPC scenario that you said is right on. I mean, as a utility, you don't necessarily care how they do the work. It's up to them. So it doesn't matter if it's AUD or not. You may just provide them with a base drawing and let them run with it.
Yeah, it's just the end game where that becomes important, because we need all that data back to our GIS. So that's a very manual approach still.
Very true.
Yeah.
Okay. Go on to kind of the next one.
So are you having to redraw everything that comes in then? So how are you getting it into SAP?
How are they updating the data in SAP? Because it's not costing. So if they're needing to update asset data and stuff like that through probably old school paper and forms, it's probably painful for other groups. Yeah.
We want to take care of them all.
This is a more common one, even though it was probably more common a couple of years ago. It's a less common trend, I guess, in today's world. This is where the utility buys all the licenses and the utility hosts all the hardware licenses, et cetera, in typically a VDI environment like Citrix. So SCE uses this. I'm sure Dominion, I think, is heading down this road with them owning the licenses, it being on Citrix. Anybody else in here hosting VDI environments? So this was we saw this for a long time. A lot of years, people were just buying the licenses, hosting the hardware. Everything was controlled. There's a lot of benefits to doing that. You don't have to have external update processes. You literally control the environment. You know everything that they're doing in that environment, everything they're allowed to do in that environment. But there's also the cons, which are trying to manage all the external users all the time, because you're basically treating them like employees, even though they are contractors. And then you have to provide all the hardware and the costs that go with those hardwares and licenses.
Jim, can we ask, you describe your environment? So how do you configure it, your external contractors, and manage? What's your success story, or share with us some of the challenges, please?
Well, I don't know a lot about it. Just ring a bell about some I heard. We don't manage the designers themselves, but I think we're heavy into the Citrix world, and then the designers could come in through Citrix, and then we'll host it on the licenses. That just rang a bell in my head, so that's why I had the shaky hand. Yeah, I can't speak to the pros and cons of it myself.
This is the typical layout architecture. Don't need to get into too many details, but essentially the red line means you're outside the firewall, right? So you as a provider or on your laptop, you're going to a website, you're going to a Citrix portal, and you're logging in. And when you log in, you work in an environment that looks exactly like the utility designers, right? You have access to the EAM system, you have access to the GIS system. Everything just works like you're a designer for that company. So there's a lot of people that have gone that way over the years.
What I've heard, Nicole, you mentioned that you have to provide the hardware to contractors. So can you explain, because they're just to pay attention, we're trying to understand factors impacting ability to support an overall cost. Some utilities, and we saw the presentation from SCE, that's kind of their configuration. They allow contractors to use their hardware laptops, but access through VPN and Citrix. So here in your configuration, you have to provide hardware, right? Any particular, I understand, like maybe not necessarily mention those reasons, but is that driven by your IT or more of business requirements, or why would you provide the hardware?
We just went live like 15 months ago, and we're renewing a contract down at the exact same time. So I don't think there was a whole lot of thought put into it. We don't have it hosted. So it was, I don't even know whose decision it was, probably contracting. It was just like a knee-jerk reaction. We need to get these people designing. And we just treat them exactly like internal employees. We mail them a laptop with everything loaded, and we have to provide support. There's lots of issues with that, with anytime there's a hardware problem, and we have to try and support them. And it's not necessarily our IT department, because sometimes it's not really an IT issue. It's maybe a licensing issue that they don't deal with. So we were thinking that maybe we wanted to go the Citrix version way, but yeah, there's a lot of security problems and even some odd problems, like the way we give employee numbers to external vendors. Brian could probably talk to it better, but their employee numbers start with an E. Apparently that causes a million problems in every program that we use. They can't access all kinds of things that you never would know until you get there. So I don't know if you want to.
So I do know Hydro One. The reason they buy the laptop is because you cannot access the Hydro One network without a Hydro One configured laptop. We had to carry Hydro One not me because I don't do work, but Sarah had to carry a Hydro One laptop on top of our laptops. So, but this is one of the workflows, at Hydro One, or any of your utilities, I have to have a laptop that's a Hydro One. I could have that one laptop be my portal, and then have the contractors working outside of saying, hey, here's the DWG. I've downloaded it. I got all my EAM, CUs, GIS data. I could disseminate it among 20, 30 people on their own laptops, go back to the Hydro One or whoever's, and then go back into the system.
We should know, Pat, we have a slide for that.
We have a slide for that.
Oh, thanks, Pat.
That's the next slide.
It's coming up. It's to be seen. This next one is a twist on the VDI version, and this is kind of trending towards what we're seeing more often. This is one where the utility actually tells the providers that you need to have an SBS license, and then you still log in through a Citrix portal. But when you go through that portal and you launch the SBS product, you get the SBS login window, and it says, what are your credentials? And even though you may have logged into the portal with an SCE address or a Hydro One address or whatever address, when you put your credentials in for the SBS licensing, you use your contractor email, and it uses one of your contractor licenses. So this is a kind of a newer twist on the VDI that we've been seeing a lot lately. And there's been a lot of push to have providers have their own licenses of SBS software. Is anybody doing this? I know several of you are, so I'm asking if you want to volunteer that. Do you have any reasoning behind why you went that way, or thoughts behind choosing that route?
So mostly we went to it because we were running up against a wall with licenses, and we were running out. And so we couldn't even provide licenses to our internal employees because we were providing them to everybody. And so that was an easy way for us to be able to manage licenses, still be able to make sure everybody had what they worked. And as long as our contractors had single sign-on, it was working fine.
Very cool. Have you run into any issues or anything that you want to share with this approach?
Not that I'm aware of.
Less problems.
Less problems. That's good.
Yeah.
Any additional kind of specific configurations that you had to do in your Citrix environment, or just okay?
We've been on several calls lately with some contractors for PP&L. I know PP&L is going this route as well. And it's interesting because as the utility company starts to get to where they're rolling out and they're going to production, the notification goes out to the providers that, hey, you need to have a license, you need to get AUD, you need to get up to speed on what's going on. And it's kind of shifted some of the training, right? Like the base AUD training that everybody gets and uses is now being moved even outside of your implementations to some extent, because it's being done by the providers when they get their licenses or when they get set up. And then what the client needs to provide is almost like the process training, the icing on top of that AUD. Is that what you guys did as well? Somewhat.
We were rolling out AUD after we started rolling into that audibly in spiders. We had actually invited a lot of our contractors to come to our internal training.
Gotcha.
And they would each send 2 people, and then they'd get those 2 people back to their company and would train the rest from there.
Yeah. So this is, like we said, this is a trend we've been seeing is pushing more towards the providers having a license. Utility is still hosting in this case. So there's still a Citrix environment. Providers are still logging into a Citrix environment. So, of course, all the cool stuff that happens, like being able to access EAM, all the UDH GIS stuff, all the interactions that you can have inside of the utility firewall are still there. It's just that the license is being owned by the provider and provided by the provider. This is the one I think Pat was referring to. Oh, so great.
So when you have the provider-owned licenses and they work with multiple utilities, can they switch between the utilities depending upon the VDI? Okay.
Yes, a little known fact, hold your ears, Pat. A little known fact is that it is a named user license, right? So if you are a provider and that user has a license, when he goes to SC and logs in, he's using that license. And then when he logs out and it goes to Hydra 1, he's using that license. And when he like it's that person's license. And you can swap them. Like you could take it from this user, reassign it to that user. But that one user, that's their license when they log in. You cannot concurrently log into all those places, right? You have to log out of one and log into the other. This is the twist that Pat was talking about earlier, in that, and this is a newer one that we've seen lately. There's still someone at your provider's firm that is inside the firewall and able to work inside the system. And they function almost like an admin user. So that you have 1 to N people, a small subset of people that is allowed to go into the utility environment and download stuff into the drawing file and link it up to the correct EAM systems with the work orders, create all the, correct naming conventions. But then they take that file and give it to someone in their environment on their hardware that is completely separate from the utilities environment. So the admin user is almost functioning like a downloader of information, a preparation of information person who can then take this and assign it to designer 1 or assign it to designer 2 who has no access to the utility. And then when the person is done, the designer is done, they take it and give it back to the admin person to put it back into the utility environment. So it's an interesting twist. What it does is allows the utility to only work with a smaller subset. Just like when you were talking about training, like you trained 1 or 2 point people for that particular contractor, you could have 1 or 2 admin people for that particular contractor so that you're managing a smaller subset of users coming in and out of your system, potentially a smaller subset of hardware users coming in and out of your system. And then the provider manages the rest of the process. However they want to handle that drawing to get the design done to be ready to put back, then they handle that.
Actually, Jim, if next slide explains the concept. So everything what you try to explain with the hands is on the diagram. Right. So important part, as Jim stressed, as you see on the provider side, there is only few users declared to be an administrators, and they need access and registered to be a registered user on site with a specific utility. But internally, they may have their own AUD setups, and you don't know how many users managed by that provider. What those admins do, they be able to connect through the VPN, create a package, basically link drawing to a work order, create work order boundary, extract JS data, update latest, greatest CU catalog, and that creates a package. And that package is given internally to many designers who would complete the work, and then they give it back to administrator. And in this case, administrator is some sort of a super user who would not only do the basic work of publishing data, but also review the data and then press a button to connect and update system of records in utility. So in this case, it's maybe just one utility laptop with many local configurations using hardware from the provider. Another way of thinking about supporting contractors.
Does this make sense conceptually? Everybody, any questions on what we were talking about there? Yes.
The license question. So like Encore, we buy the license for our contractors, right? So you're telling me we give them a name license. Encore, they're doing work for me. They're pumping out designs, but then they pick up another contract. So if they have a named license provided by Encore, they can go do other work for somebody else and not be paying, that utility won't be paying for the license. Is that how I'm interpreting it? If we don't have them provide their own license?
I'm going through all the technical ramifications in my head, and I'm looking at Chuck, and we're like communicating telepathically.
Okay.
It's really, we not only talking about licenses, but identity management.
Yeah, identity management is.
Yeah, there is a process of how you provide your licenses to providers. So they are really registered on the name of Encore organization. So and can be used only under Encore umbrella. And that's number one. Number two, the new framework that's being set up at this stage allows very tight monitoring. So all the even individual logons to AUD are logged, and we know where the user used as an environment to do the work. So it's a good question, something to think about when we set up and provide you environment to configure users. I suggest we actually bring up our team that we have, everyone's here who configuring the portal, and talk about this specific case on Thursday, just to make sure you're comfortable with the way we set up environment to support that scenario.
Yeah, because that would be a concern, I think.
Yeah.
No,
you know,
somebody
was
was
a good question. I looked back and immediately saw Jason Cagle writing stuff, so it was a very good question. I don't know the full answer, but let's get together on Thursday with it.
We'll talk about this on Thursday. Thank you.
Generally, when it's environment specific like that, like an Encore, generally we don't see that happening, but we'll talk through it.
Hey, I'm Kyle Scanlon with Encore. I had a question on this scenario here. So it appears you have like a stale package that you're bringing down. Is that correct? So the provider is working on like essentially an offline copy of the design. So are they not running into issues where like the CU catalog has updated since that's been brought down, since they've completed their design, and then they try to import that back and it
So
has conflicts?
It depends on your definition of the package that they're moving back and forth. When we talk about the project and work order package, the design file is just one piece of that, right? It's really the admin user's responsibility to say, okay, I went and got this new catalog last week or yesterday, and help them keep that up to date because they're the admin user that has access to it. So there's a lot in this. When it just says package, there's a lot that package entails. This puts a lot on that admin person. But you're thinking about it right, in that it's the admin is logging in and getting a snapshot of what they need to do their work. And then they're packaging that up and taking it to a designer and saying, go do this job. If it's one of these 6-month, 9-month kind of jobs, you're going to have updates. You're going to want to get refreshed. And there's going to have to be a process where that design is refreshed from the admin person in order for that to happen. So these are exactly the kind of trade-offs and balances that we wanted people to start thinking about, right? This seems like a really straightforward way to do it, right? There's a small number of users for the utility to manage. Some person is responsible for pulling data down, putting it back. This all sounds great. But then you dig into the details and it's like, wow, we really have to have a process on the provider side to handle this kind of package and keep it up to date and deliver it in a correct manner. And you guys have to have a way on the utility side to make sure that it's correct and up to date. And so these are all the trade-offs that happen with all these different licensing schemes.
Thank you.
The good news, there are quite a few options to consider. So, but Kyle, you're absolutely correct. It needs to be kind of taken in a through perspective of use cases and the needs of utility. So, if you need updates and kind of guaranteed delivery of updated catalogs, then this option may not work for you. So that's where it would be good to kind of have this collective mind to create specific scenarios and say, yes, this option works for us, this doesn't, and these are reasons. So that's what we're trying to get as a feedback through this session, just to go maybe over individual scenarios and understand reasons why it may not work.
And the other aspect of that, right, is as you think about these and you start to internalize them and how you might set up your license, we want to hear that feedback because we are digging into our licensing right now. Like, we want to make the support portal more functional. We want to make the licenses work better for you and for your contractors and you together. So we're doing work in that area. So we thought that by giving you kind of some of the templates we're seeing and some of the trends that we're seeing out there, it might stimulate you to help us get this right when we do it. So Jason is responsible, Jason Cagle in the back. But talk to me, Sergey, Pat, anybody. If you have ideas about stuff, let us know so that we can make sure that we're putting that in the list for this license changes that we're doing. Anybody have any that I didn't list up here? As you were thinking through and trying to compare what you were doing with your licenses, did we miss any up here? Anyone? Cool. That's good. It is late in the afternoon, but that's good. Okay. One last side of this. This is another aspect we've been exploring a lot lately because we are getting a lot of questions. As the trend moves towards providers owning their own license, providers are very cost-efficient, process-efficient kind of people. And we've been asked a lot, how do we use this? Like, we have these licenses and we have to have them because we're supporting X, Y, or Z. But we have the licenses. Like, what else can we do with them internally? So think through those scenarios as well, because once you own those licenses, you own those licenses, and you can use them for internal design processes, or if you have long-term clients that don't have AUD, and you want to put together a basic configuration that handles their design process, you can do things like that because you own the licenses now. So any other questions, queries, comments? We just wanted to kind of go through and say, hey, these are ways we see you guys using licenses. Are we missing anything? Help us provide the right licensing back to you on this. If you have any ideas, let us know.
So just to comment on the issue with contractors, this has nothing to do with licenses. You can have that all squared away. One of the issues we ran into is finding contractors that know what the heck they're doing with AUD. So background, so we've implemented AUD as of 5-6 years ago, and historically we've had 3 to 4 contract companies providing design work in MicroStation, and we moved to this smart tool, and those contract companies are like, hey, we want to start providing you AUD deliverables. And we spoke with our senior management, and we're more than happy to entertain that, but they're going to have to learn how to do AUD on their own. In other words, we don't want to get in the position of helping some design contract firm get a leg up on their competitor because we're taking the time to train them. So our response is, you go learn AUD and come back to us and let us know when you're ready, and then we'll test that out. The other kind of interesting thing is, just as a side note, this may or may not benefit anybody, but we've had some retirements, as most of us in the room have recently, and you have a 35 year experienced designer walk out the door, and they've historically been using MicroStation, and they get hired as a contractor to come back into SRP. And the question becomes, well, do I take the time to train them on how to do AUD when they've been very successful doing what they've been doing, and they're likely to be short-term anyway? Or do I come up with some hybrid solution to maximize their value to the business while not detracting from our ultimate goals of producing a smart design? So just some ramblings there, but some things to think about.
I think those are great points, and I'll throw out some thoughts. Everybody feel free to chime in, especially SBS side. What you're talking about, especially 5 or 6 years ago, common problem, right? I mean, you saw Pat's slide earlier, like 2013, there were 4. In 2024, there were not 4, right? The number of contractors who are familiar with SBS products is increasing pretty exponentially. But we've also taken steps to help with that, right? Like we've partnered with ImagineIt on this virtual training program that we have, the e-learning productivity now, and regularly push people to go do that, right? Because that is our training site. It has all of our AUD training and is continually updated and has admin training now. I know Sarah's been working on. So we're trying to take steps to help with that. There was another thought in there, but it rattled out. So anybody else from the SBS side have thoughts on that part of it?
I would just say that we definitely see a lot more contractors who are experienced with AUD. We're trying to get that ecosystem to really be expanded. We're trying to make it a lot easier, as Jim said, so that you don't need a ton of training. If you've certainly worked in AutoCAD, you don't need as much as you do if you're a MicroStation person. But, I think we see more of the utility customers. They have a relationship with a number of contractors, and those contractors are coming up to speed pretty quickly. And so if we can help with that, if you feel like you can't find contractors, let us know. There's a long list we work with, and we'd be happy to pass it along. But it's a growing pain, but it's something that we're trying to minimize, and we're trying to help so that you have access to the capacity that you need to do the design work you have.
On the other side, the process issue you mentioned with the experienced or seasoned designer, one of the best approaches I've seen to that situation is to pair them up with younger people and turn them into mentors. There are a lot of people coming out of college, and Autodesk folks are here will tell you how many hundreds of thousands of people learn AutoCAD every year in the world. There are tons of people coming out of college that know CAD. Those same less seasoned employees do not know design. But those guys and girls that have been there 30, 40 years do. And pairing them up with 2 or 3 people, I've seen be very successful at other companies, even if it's just in a senior role where they check afterwards and they provide that engineering check for somebody that's new. You're right, training them in the new system. They don't want to. They may not want to be a contractor for you if you try to make them, right? They just want to do their stuff, right? They want to still be productive and useful in the utility environment, and that's awesome. That should be encouraged. But like you said, there's places where it would work better and places where it wouldn't work as well. And that's just one way I've seen that handled that seemed to work pretty well.
Yes, maybe on the contractor side, a couple thoughts too is, so I've been working with AUD for about 14 years now, so I think that's pretty rare. You know, we have a lot of experience, but even for us, when we work on support contracts for different utilities, there's a learning curve just on different implementations and those things. So I understand what SRP is saying is that they don't want to pay for that learning curve. And then on the contractor side, there's us. We may have people who know AUD to some degree, but there's also a gap in specific instances and specific things that are unique to your AUD implementation. So on the training side for utilities to provide training on what's unique to their use case or their implementation that allows contractors to onboard, I think there's something there to be worked on as well. So you can say, we have AUD people who can do this work, but what's the onboarding time for this utility-specific instance of AUD that might be streamline some of those processes? So those are things that we're looking at and try to figure out solutions to as well.
That's a great point. I think that's absolutely spot on. Did I remember correctly at SCE that you recorded some of your training? Like, how do you still provide training to external contractors through actual training classes, or do you send them through recorded training first?
They have access to all of our written and video job aids. So the video job aids are still for creating those. We have the original training videos though and modules when we first implemented the AUD refresh.
First, so I may not have been SCE. I remember speaking with someone. The way we're seeing the license scenario where the providers are buying the license, but the utility's hosting, what we're seeing is that the provider is going and getting basic AUD training, and then the utility is providing that gap that you're talking about. I don't know if anyone, it would be curious to know if anyone is recording that training or putting it into something like a productivity now, where you can make it just a training path for providers so that they can at least have the basic AUD and the basic your specific training before they start asking questions. Is anybody doing something like that? Kind of.
So Jim, when we did our rollout and everything, and we trained our users, we actually had a special train the trainer, and we took like 1 or 2 representatives from the contractors, and that's who we trained. We did not train their entire staff, but we did train certain people there so that they could take it back to show the specifics of how we were using it.
I think the critical point that they're bringing up, though, is that basic AUD is basic AUD. Everybody knows you can just click on the drop down and place some things, but every client has a twist on that. Every client has a specific implementation. We saw several of them this morning, right? When we were doing some of the schematic line stuff. Somebody has to be trained to do that. You don't get that in the basic AUD training, right? So where does that come in? And particularly on the provider side, where sometimes there's a lot of churn. People on the design side, they're designers, and they'll bounce to where they can make the most money designing. And so, if you're bringing new people into a client and you're wanting to teach them how to do schematics for this particular client, where is that coming from? And that's a great gap to point out. I don't know the answer to that. Yeah.
So one of the things we did is we showed you the SharePoint site that we put together. We did record one of our 3-day training sessions and have it posted up there.
Yeah.
So all of our contractors have access to that site. They can get to all that training material. And some of our contractors even went to the same company that we hired to facilitate training.
Okay.
So they're using the same how-to guide. They're doing all that just to get that same information and get that out there.
See, those are all great ideas and concepts. I'd talk amongst yourselves and try and come up with something that can help make that more widespread. Because I mean, you're literally hearing from the provider, hey, we get basic AUD, but you guys do some weird stuff over there. You guys do things differently, right? And so how do we learn that? How do we learn that easier so we can provide that to you?
I will also say from the provider side, we kind of take two different approaches to training when it comes to AUD. So we have a lot of existing clients that we've worked with for years that are making the transition to AUD. And then we have some clients that we've never worked with before that are already on AUD. So for those existing clients, a lot of our designers and engineers are learning AUD for the first time because they've been working hand in hand with that client for the last 10 years. And so they already understand the client, the design standards, how they like to see things. And then for the other ones, we're bringing them up on AUD internally. And then most of the training they're getting from the client is client-specific things. So like how they implement AUD, how their design standards influence the way they work within AUD, stuff like that. So we kind of have to take two different approaches from a provider side when it comes to which client specifically we're talking about.
Gotcha. Thanks for that. Other questions, comments, points? It's very rare to sit in a room with all of your peers and a lot of your providers and be able to pick their brains. And I've seen it. It's been phenomenal all day. I've seen people grouping up and talking about things. Continue to do that. That's the purpose of Peer Utility Group, right? There's very rare that you're going to sit in a room with Burns and Mac and Imagine It and Atwell and Locana, TRC. I'll get it right. Sorry, Brent. People don't just hang out together and talk about this stuff. So take advantage of it. And these are the kind of conversations we're trying to spawn with these. Like, let your brain spin for a little bit and then tell us what you want. And we're working on this stuff right now.